Welcome back. Hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. I did. Still don't have a name for this podcast yet. Thinking maybe Journey Before Destination, as I'm a huge fan of Stormlight Archives. That's a big theme in there. So maybe we'll go with something like that. But anyways, we're back here to talk about some recent things. One huge announcement for director of NIH, Dr. I don't know how to pronounce it. I don't want to butcher his name, but anyways, he got announced huge during COVID and fighting back for just the more common sense things. And he's a doctor, essentially got I think taken off platforms, and he's like a Stanford doctor who was right on everything. And they just announced him at least to be nominated for the director of NIH, which is huge. Big fan of that. He's for free speech, freedom. I don't think he's like technically a libertarian, but he's very libertarian leaning. At least it seems in the way he acts. So huge news there. Super happy about that pick. I'm not happy about every pick that Trump has put in by any means, but I'm certainly happy about this one. Bitcoin will pop over here real quick. No, not financial advice, but is kind of creeping around this mid 90s range. I think it's probably going to do that for a little while, but then it's going to hopefully, at least I don't know, but I'm hoping here in the next couple of weeks, maybe right before or within a week or two after Christmas, pop up and break the 100K mark. But we shall see, and we will be there when it does. We love Bitcoin, digital gold, actually way better than just digital gold, to be quite honest. But big fan of Bitcoin, so hopefully it goes up and beyond. Next thing I want to talk about is Marc was on Andreessen, who is a former Democrat. Maybe technically might still be registered as one, I'm not sure, but he was on Joe Rogan's podcast. It was very entertaining to watch. Talk about a lot of stuff, but at one point he talks about debanking. It's a concept I've heard of before, but just never really thought of in this way. But how essentially it's being used by our government, by the establishment in an authoritarian manner to go after its political opponents or people who it disagrees with. It started off 10, 15 years ago with during the Obama administration to go after essentially weed and gun companies. And this is how they always start, right? They start with, hey, here's this one that, most people maybe, which I don't personally agree with, but most people might be able to agree on. But then inevitably, the blob pushes it on to other things that are essentially much more nefarious. And so apparently they have been to a bunch of tech people and so on and so forth, which may be why a lot of the tech people have now, and according to Marc, have now kind of swapped sides, even if they have quietly. I know Zuckerberg is a lot in the news right now because he went down to Mar-a-Lago. I may talk about that later, but we'll kind of let Marc go over this with us.
They do the other thing new in financial services. And
can you give me an example?
Well, I guess debanking. This is where a lot of the debanking comes from. Is these agencies. So debanking is when you as either a person or your company are literally kicked out of the banking system.
Like they did to Kanye.
Exactly, like they did to Kanye. My partner Ben's father has been debanked.
Really?
We had an employee who
for what?
For having the wrong politics, for saying unacceptable things. Under current banking regulations, here's a great thing. Under current banking regulations, after all the reforms of the last 20 years, there's now a category called a politically exposed person, PEP. And if you are a PEP, you are required by financial regulators to kick them off of to kick them out of your bank.
What?
You're not allowed to have
what if you're politically on the left?
Well, that's fine.
No,
because they're not politically exposed.
So no one on the left gets debanked?
No, I have not heard of a single instance of anybody on the left getting debanked.
Could you tell me what the person that you know?
Obviously, he says he hasn't heard of one. I'm sure if you really look, there has been someone, but obviously in his case, he hasn't seen what he's saying. And I'm sure it's used certainly much more heavily toward the anti-establishment. I don't want to say left or right, although in this case I think it will sure to be a little more right, but I don't think it's going to be right. I really think it's going to be people who are bucking the system, more anti-establishment. But we'll continue.
Did what they said that got them debanked?
Oh, well, I mean, David Horowitz is a right wing, he's pro-Trump. I mean, he said all kinds of things. He's been very anti-Islamic terrorism. He's been very worried about migration, all these things.
And they debanked him for that.
Yeah, they debanked him. So you get kicked out of your bank account. You get kicked out of you can't do credit card transactions. But, by the way, you can't.
How is that legal?
Well, exactly. So this is the thing, and then you go into this thing of like, well, there's no. This is where the government and the companies get intertwined. Back to your fascism point, which is there's a constitutional amendment that says the government can't restrict your speech, but there's no constitutional amendment that says the government can't debank you, right? And so if they can't do the one thing, they do the other thing, and then they don't have to debank you. They just have to put pressure on the private company banks to do it. And then the private company banks do it because they're expected to. But the government gets to say, we didn't do it. It was the private company that did it. And of course, JP Morgan can decide who they want to have as customers, of course, right? Because they're a private company. And so it's this sleight of hand that happens. So it's basically, it's a privatized sanctions regime that lets bureaucrats do to American citizens the same thing that we do to Iran.
Whoa.
Just kick you out of the financial system. And so this has been happening to all the crypto entrepreneurs in the last 4 years. This has been happening to a lot of the fintech entrepreneurs, anybody trying to start any kind of new banking service, because they're trying to protect the big banks. And then this has been happening, by the way, also in legal fields of economic activity that they don't like. And so a lot of this started about 15 years ago with this thing called Operation.
So he's going to kind of go into where this all started, which I kind of said earlier. So we can stop it there. But this is wild. It's something I hadn't thought about, but it's just another example of the government too big, using its political power in a way that shouldn't be used, and that should be stopped. And which is why we need to decrease, the government. We need make the government more efficient, but just decrease the bureaucracy in general. It's not healthy. It's not healthy for a government. It inevitably gets too big, too sluggish, too much to stop. And the problem is, time is on the side of always on the machine. The machine always has more time, and this is something that I think the forefathers kind of saw, which is why they put certain things into place, because inevitably they knew that there is no stopping it. You let it's kind of like our government's set up in that way to be extremely slow for this reason, to try and slow the growth of the tumor known as the government. And so that's what they're here for. And Marc lays it out pretty crazy, and it's just, I didn't even realize what was going on, but that's wild. And I mean, obviously you can do your own research, but this is one of those things where the way they have it set up, it's hard to necessarily do research without just being in the know, or without being in the situation where you kind of hear all these more hearsay scenarios, which is kind of what makes it so scary, is because you have no way to really fight against it either, right? Like, because you can't necessarily prove it, right? Unless someone who's in the know comes out and says it, or if you had a coalition of a couple of these guys coming out, like someone like JP Morgan's CEO coming out and saying something about it. It's like he said, it's a sleight of hand shuffle situation. So you can't really tell, you can't know, but I certainly believe it, at least in some aspects, because again, absolute power corrupts absolutely. We know that you buck the establishment if you go after the establishment. There's example after example of them coming after people for that, and throughout history, but also throughout the U.S. government itself. So that's crazy. Also, damn. What the? Look at this damn frog. That was me after Thanksgiving yesterday. Sheesh. Moving on. Trump actually paid in the last 3, 4, 5 days. Talked about he's going to put a 25% tariff on, not China. He's going to put some tariffs on China too, but on Canada and Mexico. The Mexico one is very obvious. He's obviously using these as a bargaining tool to try and stop the flow of illegal illegal immigrants coming across the border. I highly doubt that he will actually put and one, there would be exceptions anyway, I'm sure. I feel like it probably won't even happen anyways, because I think this is just his way to try and put things on the table to get fixed by day one, or very quickly into his term. He obviously only has one term this time, so he doesn't have the ability to take things slow. He needs to jump on it very quickly, and I think him coming out with this statement, 50 days ahead of time, is essentially putting Mexico and Canada on blast, although I'll quickly talk about Canada because I'm not really sure too much. I mean, obviously in some regards, maybe the border, but Canada one, I don't know if that's like a misdirect or something. I don't 100% get that one. Maybe it's just a 2 birds, 1 stone kind of thing, or maybe it's just so it doesn't look like he's targeting Mexico. I don't know. I don't really have too much of an opinion on the Canadian side of the thing. Although we'll say I just saw that Justin Trudeau is on his way to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Trump because he's clearly worried about it. I think he's up for re-election here soon. And he's trying to save his election, which may be why. Actually, that might be exactly why. So tariffs on Mexico, he's trying to stop it before he gets in day one. I think that's the goal. I think that's probably what he's hoping to accomplish. And I think he probably will accomplish that, or at least fairly quickly. Yeah, he's essentially trying to stop the bleeding. To stop the bleeding is step one in stopping the illegal immigration crisis. To do, I think everyone can agree, stopping the bleeding and getting the criminal sect, I think we know of 500 to a million that are criminals, like not criminals past just breaking the initial law to even get into the country, like literally committing crimes. actively while here. So I think that's step one and step two. And then, from there, you kind of go to see what you can do in a humane way. After that, I don't know how deep they want to get into that, but I think those are obviously step one and step two. And this is him trying to jump on the gun with stopping or setting up step one, which is, again, stopping the bleed at the border. And that's his way of trying to accomplish it. And I mean, in that case, it's a great way to use tariffs, as a bargaining chip, which is kind of the way to use tariffs in a way that, everyone should be somewhat able to agree upon. There's obviously a lot of back and forth on tariffs being a tax for the people and blah, blah, blah. In some ways, which it could be. But, in this case, I think he's using it to try and have it as a bargaining chip. We will see. And as things go on, obviously, we'll call out if I feel like it's a negative way. But yeah. So moving on to next. Starlink is now with T-Mobile plus others. T-Mobile is the one in the U.S., which is the one we are paying most close attention to. But that means you have, and I don't even think you have to upgrade anything from what I saw. Show more. Say goodbye to dead zones. Hello to seamless global coverage. Get ready for the future of mobile networks. This is awesome. I mean, this is huge actually for SpaceX and Tesla. I don't know if it had a sunk cost up front, but this is starting to look pretty nice for SpaceX and Starlink. I mean, this is, if you have this contract and then if it works really well, you can I believe have the contract with everyone, Verizon, AT&T. If it works way better, the internet's way better, the calls, you have connection anywhere. You can be in the Amazon, you can be in the woods hunting, you can be hiking, you could be, in your building, and for whatever reason, the cell service isn't getting through, but maybe the satellite service can get through, and maybe you can go, there's so many applications where this is huge. Excited about this and wanted to see, I mean, this is going to make Elon even more powerful, and which obviously he's known for having such a site to begin with, which is why he is where he is. I mean, he's just really, really, really good at looking way into the future. And I would almost bet money that when he started Starlink, that this was on the horizon for him, that he knew that this is probably one of the places he wanted to get to, and where it would really start to pay off is if he got to this section. Probably with SpaceX, he started it to get to Mars, but then was like, hey, how do we fund this? We could do the Starlink thing because we get more practice, we get rockets up into the sky. We could then use Starlink to then pay for the rockets to go to Mars, and this is a huge contract with T-Mobile, I'm sure. I don't know what the actual numbers are, but if it works really well with these 6, eventually it can take over essentially the world as far as like the contracts here, make massive amounts of money, which he can then put towards getting to Mars, because Mars is there's not really going to be any profit in the whole Mars situation for, well, certainly a long time. So you have to have money to fund it. So super excited about that. That's cool. I'd love to see how that works out and shakes out, and we'll see. Big thing, the last, I guess, 2 things we'll talk about here is, one, reading Lord of the Rings and 1984 could lead to right-wing extremism, government report warns in the UK. As Elon says here, what is happening in the UK? I don't know. I've been seeing nonstop stuff about the UK that is kind of just wild. Which I guess I get it here, in their eyes at least. I wouldn't call it right-wing extremism. What I would call it is anti-authoritarianism, which usually gets leaning more to the right in today's age, but it's not a left or right-wing thing. The Lord of the Rings one kind of threw me off, but I guess if you think of Eye of Sauron as kind of like a big brother in 1984, I guess that makes sense. Anyways, kind of just quick side note. I don't know. Just saw it. I thought that was interesting. And then last but not least, the most important thing of this entire election, realistically, in my opinion, which should have made probably everyone a single issue voter. I know it made David Freeberg on the All In podcast, and realistically, the 2 big things to think about was going to be the budget and World War III. And part of the reason for the budget is because inevitably it would lead to World War III. If you can't pay back your debt, eventually that debt's going to come calling. Well, who owns most of the debt? Not us. So how do you cancel the debt? Well, you go to war. Because you can't pay the debt back if we're, if 15, 20 years from now, we're 100% of our budget is going toward the deficit and paying the deficit back or the debt back, then obviously there's only one real option, which is why it's extremely important to get the deficit under control, to get the budget under control, to get back to a surplus so we can start paying down the debt. This is the numbers, so I just wanted to bring it up so we can all see it. Total spending, 6.16 trillion. Total revenue, 4.47. I think I just saw earlier Vivek popped out and said that I think on day 1, with the stuff he's already found, you can cut about $1 billion, make things more efficient and whatnot. I mean, there's going to be some crazy things happening, but you took 20 years to build up this much of 24 years, I guess, to build up this much of a national debt. it's going to take some time and some probably some broken eggs to get things under control. But I mean, it's either that or you again inevitably lead to a much worse situation. So it's better to have a couple broken eggs and some things fixed on the right now, as opposed to having a much worse situation when you have the whole entire kitchen gone. So better to have a couple broken eggs than the entire kitchen destroyed. And yeah, that's gonna be it for today. But again, hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving, and I will see you on the next episode of Journey Before Destination. We'll see how that works. I like that, but I don't know if it's got the right ring to it, but I like it for now. Peace.